I normally do a list of thank yous, but basically it's Carolyn Ravenscroft at the Historical Society, Patrick Brown, and Josh Cutler for helping me write all these stories. And of course, my wife Grace, and 3 children who have put me into the 21st century. If those of you who don't know me, I'm a retired land surveyor, civil engineer, and I got started with this about 11 or 12 years ago. Mildred Pierce. That's a picture of Mildred when she was younger. She used to live over adjacent to the Miles Standish cellar hole, about one street this way from there. And then they later moved to Tremont Street. It's the house where the stone wall is that has the little, I don't know what you'd call them, little gargoyle. There you go. That's good. Gargoyle. So I wanted to prove, or try to prove, that there was some connection between the author and Duxbury's Mildred Pierce. I think the evidence says yes. This is James M. Cain. He wrote The Postman Always Rings Twice. He wrote Double Indemnity. He wrote Mildred Pierce. He wrote about 40 books altogether. And he wrote other articles, political. He was the senior editor at the New Yorker magazine, where they called the editor Jesus. He was the 26th Jesus. A very accomplished English student. His father was a dean of a college in Maryland, and he eventually taught English at that same college. I think it was called Washington College, or George Washington. He had 3 obsessions. One would be women, 2 would be alcohol, and 3 would be opera. He was a devoted opera fan to extreme extent. So if I mention opera, it's him that's the fan. My 3 obsessions were Lizzie Borden, Mildred Pierce, and the Pilgrims. There's the 3 books that were his biggest sellers. The titles there, anybody recognize some significance to those? What they were about was a woman and her boyfriend got together and killed her husband. And they're both based on that case. So he was writing about people that really existed. The Postman Always Rings Twice was whenever a bill from the insurance company came to the house, he would ring the bell twice so she could go get the bill, and her husband wouldn't know that he was insured. And he was insured for double indemnity in the case of a accident, so heavily insured. And my point is that if he wrote those 2 about real people, why not the 3rd one? His biographer, Roy Hoops, knew him better than anybody and said he was a man with little imagination, and he had to have life experiences to write about. And he also, Hoops, had personal interviews with Cain, so he knew the man well. Cain was the master of few words and brief dialogue. This is, well, let's see here. This is The Postman Always Rings Twice. It's It's about 300 words. This is Mildred. That's about the same thing. And when he wrote, and The Postman Always Rings Twice was the first grand slam in American publishing. A bestseller hardback, a bestseller softcover, and that's The Postman Always Rings Twice. If you talk about economy of words, that's the paperback. It was also a play, a movie, and it was syndicated. So that was a big success for him. Now, Hoops was not a master of words. 684 pages of the bio of James M. Cain. A tough read, and I've been through it about 3 or 4 times now. And there are like 30 or 40 pages in the index, and 6 or 7 of them are the different phases of Cain's life, like his books, his work as an editor, his marriages, really a thorough job. One of the connections that I think is possible, James W.D. Seymour, that's him right there. This is Prime Minister Anthony Eden. Seymour was his assistant, but he used to be an aide to Joseph P. Kennedy. That would be Jack Kennedy's father. Joseph P. was the ambassador to the United Kingdom. The other connections, both Cain and Seymour were in the First World War, northeast of Paris, writing about their units. Trying to get paper, ink, research, and what have you, so they might have met in France. Another possibility is Cain wrote a play called 7-Eleven that was at Cohasset, and the people, a lot of actors and actresses stayed in the I forget it's the Shores Hotel, which is on the corner of Soule Avenue and Tremont Street. It's now a residence. It's on the west side of Soule Ave, and on the east side was a little house where the employees at the hotel used to live. That hotel was catered to actors and actresses, and Cain might have stayed there. Had he stayed there, he might have gone by Ma Pierce's restaurant every day to go to Cohasset. He did, his play was in August of 1938, and he actually stayed until November of 1938. Several months, long after the play had closed. The play was like a week, and he stayed here until November. Seymour's aunt was a world-famous opera singer. Her name was Blanche Davenport. She lived across, the Seymours and the Davenports lived across the street from each other on Washington Street. I had the number here, I think it was like 148. The Seymour's house is a white house, and I'll show you the Davenport's house. Let me see before we get out of this. Both of them became screenwriters for different studios, but for a time they were both at Universal Studios, which later became Warner Brothers. And they lived about a mile apart in Hollywood. So now there's 2 or 3 places where those 2 people could have met. Let's see, yeah, that hotel was called Shore Acres. Grace and I were watching some of the Mildred Pierce movie, and she found out that Mildred at one point says, when she's talking about starting a restaurant, 500 cars go by and it's right at an intersection, which sort of describes the milepost in the 30s. And then, let me see what else here. This is a letter from Mildred Pierce's daughter. Now, Mildred had 6 children, but only 2 of them were in the house around 1930, and again till 1938 or 39. This letter was from Nina Pierce to Marjorie McMillan, who wrote Stopping Places in Duxbury. And she said, in the fall, many people who came to eat would ask to sit in the kitchen and were allowed. As Mother was cooking, she would always entertain her guests with many stories. All were repeat guests. Several came from New York every year. At the time, Kane was the editor of the New Yorker. Now the letter was 1991, and she's thinking back for Marjorie McMillan to write this book, which happened around 1991. In the fall of 1938, J.M. Kane was in the South Shore from August till November. By the way, my daughter and I went to the Library of Congress to research this 94 boxes. 1 box is missing, 1938. And the only way I found that he stayed until November was his tax return in 1939. He deducted his hotel expenses. There were his 4 wives. Mary was, he married her, that's Mary Plow, when he was very young. Alina Schusted Taizeka, that could be another Duxbury connection. The Schusteds are a Duxbury family, but I contacted them and they have no recollection of there being any connection there. But he was married to her for almost 20 years, and he wrote these books mostly when he was married to her. The next marriage was a couple of years to Eileen Bisbee, who was a silent screen actress. That only lasted a couple of years, and he paid for that, literally. And Florence Macbeth, she was the opera singer, and he was married to her for 22 years. Because he was a fan of hers when he was younger. That's how devoted he was to opera. He used to have a Friday night sing-along around a piano, and they would sing opera. He wanted to be an opera singer, and his mother told him he didn't have the voice for it. He ended up marrying her, and that was a fairly successful marriage. And I think she predeceased him by about 10 years. He died in 77, I think. Oops, what happened? There's Mildred A. Ma. When she owned the milepost, it was called Ma Pierce's. Her first initials were M.A., so that could have been the reason, but also she had 6 children. And you'll notice this fur coat, and I don't know if that's a fur hat or not on Ma, but this is the outfit that Joan Crawford wore in the first few scenes of the movie. And she won an Academy Award for that movie, 1945. There's Ma Pierce's restaurant. That's the milepost. What you have here is, this was a screened porch like with 5 tables, and on the other side, which now does not have tables, towards Chestnut Street, that was 5 tables on that side. So, and the dining room that's there today was built in front here. And she used to have movies and a picnic ground in the woods here. I think a cigarette company gave her a movie screen. In one of my stories, I asked, well, I wonder if she ever showed the Mildred Pierce movie, but she probably was pretty embarrassed about that movie. The family was sort of cooperative with me for a while, but then I'm talking about their mother, and I guess we have a strained relationship now. That's Kate Winslet. She played Mildred in the HBO miniseries, a 5-part miniseries, which was, I don't know if they were all 2 hours, but there's at least 5 hours, somewhere between 5 and 10 hours. And that movie more closely followed Kane's book. Let's see here. Now this, just to keep the cast of characters here straight, the 2 daughters that were left at Mildred's house were Myrtle and Nina. The other 2 daughters and the 2 sons were out of the house. This is, and I bring that up because I think Kane took the liberty of letting the younger daughter die from the flu or whatever, and then combine all of the, let's say, evil in their characters into one. And I'll show you that character, but this is Myrtle. This is Myrtle in high school. Hit the wrong button. This is Myrtle in, I think this is her high school picture. And this is Myrtle with her daughter Judith, who was born in 1940, and she had 5 sons, and they lived very close to where we go in Florida. And I interviewed her grandson, no, her son, Judith's son. So this would have been her grandmother, his grandmother, and then Mildred would have been the great-grandmother. This is Nina in high school, one of the few people who graduated from Duxbury High School in 3 years. It didn't happen very often in those days. She was a brilliant woman. She wanted to be a surgeon, not just a doctor. She wanted to be a surgeon. I think there's a difference. Let's see now. I don't know if any of you recognize that building. That is the storage shed at the milepost. But it used to be a 2-seat outhouse. This door was one door for women, and on the other side a door for men, and there was a partition in the middle. In the book, it describes the restaurant as right there under the trees with 2 toilets. And why I wanted to show you the evidence that convinces me that Mildred was Kane's Mildred. Any one of these things could be coincidental, but put all together, I don't think you could ever find another family that had these same characteristics. First of all, the name is the same. Both husbands were home builders. Both husbands abandoned their wives. Of course, it was in the Depression. Both Mildreds had 2 daughters. In Ma Pierce's case, 2 daughters still living at home. Both ran a restaurant by themselves, no help from a husband or anybody. Both restaurants were in a seaside location. Both sold a lemon sponge or lemon meringue pie, which was their big seller. And then the restaurant was right there under the trees with the 2 toilets. Both women had older sisters, Ma in Nova Scotia, I believe. Both sets of daughters were 7 and 11 in 1930. And that's significant because he's there in 1938, The two daughters were 7 and 11. And by the way, the title of his play is 7-11. I really need to look into that. But they were 7 and 11. And in the book, the two daughters, around 1930, were 7 and 11. And both of the older daughters, the one that was 11 at the time, or in 1930, but later, were operatic singers. And she sort of made Duxbury semi-famous for doing operettas, and I have some of that here. But that's working on 17 or 18 things that are the same. Both older daughters sang on the radio, and in Myrtle's case it was Boston radio, because Plymouth radio didn't exist then. Both older daughters, Myrtle and Vida in the book, Vida, were redheads, and only 2% of the population is redhead in this country, or it was at the time. We've got a redhead up there. And both older daughters had unpleasant dispositions, to say the least. And the biggest thing that allowed Kane to finish the book was both Mildreds lost their boyfriend to a daughter. So she had a boyfriend, and one of her daughters, as it turns out, not Myrtle, Nina, ended up with her boyfriend. And Kane, normally there's a fictional statement on every fiction book that says any similarities between these people is purely coincidental. Well, in that he said, and this story is to be in California. I think to take you away from Duxbury. And if you think about him writing in 1938, it's logical, because he now has the two kids, 7 and 11, in 1930, and he gets to get what's happened to them for those 8 years. Myrtle is graduating, an opera singer at Duxbury High, singing on the radio. He gets to see all of this, and he gets to see how the relationship between the daughters is, or isn't. And let's see. Yeah, they would be, I think Myrtle would have been like 18 or 19, just getting out of high school. And she was in high school singing operettas and getting awards for what she did. Now, normally in your high school yearbook, it's prettiest, handsomest, best smile, whatever. These are some of the comments about Myrtle. She had a long list of negative and a few positive comments, but Mildred Pierce, our temperamental artist, leaves the bitter feud she had so gloriously carried on this year to some meek freshman, if one can be found. She is a little chimney and heated hot in a moment. That's the next quote. That comes out of the courtship of Miles Standish, describing Miles Standish, who also had a little temper. Myrtle and her, this is another quote, Myrtle and her mirror, powder puff and file, a silver-voiced soprano, girl of the winning smile. In one of the stories, approached the building from whence the odor had come and were served with the most delicious and hottest hot dogs ever. Why? Because they were toasted and roasted by Mildred Pierce, whose fiery temperament had gotten under the skins of her dogs. Mr. Patterson's history class, Myrtle, if you're through admiring yourself, put that mirror up and let us admire you. Uh, Under a heading of what would happen if, the quote was, Myrtle lost her mirror. More on the complimentary side, they said Myrtle Pierce, in the character of a rich old lady, was awarded a special prize for acting by the Butner store, the clothing store in Plymouth, a vicuna suit. And Myrtle Pierce, who made us famous in operettas, the China Shop, gave coveted opportunity to our operatic star, Myrtle Pierce, and for a time we bask in the reflected glory of her success. All of those were like 1937. And if we go on to, there's Vita on the right, that's Anne Blythe. They say that nobody played an evil part as well as she did. Those are a couple of the quotes that I just read to you. Myrtle on the left, Vita on the right. I think we got, yeah, this is what I was saying about his story. We had no imagination. Both The Postman Always Rings Twice, Double Indemnity were based on the real-life murder of Ruth Brown Snyder's husband by Ruth and her lover, Judd Gray. If two of Kane's fictional novels were based on real life, why not three? In answer to a critic's comment that the unattractive people in Mildred Pierce simply did not exist, Kane replied, now this is a quote from Kane, as Shaw said of Pinheiro, which is one of his characters, doesn't this fellow meet anybody? In other words, he's saying, doesn't he meet people that are alive? An admission by Kane that his characters were real. That's what I feel about that. Now this is the Mildred Pierce family. And significantly, there's Mildred there. Mildred Amanda Ma Pierce married Charles Warren Pierce. These are her 6 kids. The first one, now her husband, Mildred's husband left her. Well, Luther, he left his children. He abandoned his children and wife, and then she left. And that's on page, their children are on page 2. 9 children were abandoned. Now, I don't want to make excuses for anybody, but this family, because of Lottie Hunt, had a mitochondrial disease, and they had a lot of misfortune health-wise, and they were in an orphanage out near Springfield. And these are the other 3, Lola, Joseph, and Thelma. And here's Myrtle, married Frederick Ells. He was from Weymouth. And these are her 5 sons. Wait a minute. Brian, Jeffrey, Eric, and Kevin. Kevin's the one I talked to. And then she also had a son, Wayne, who was alive when I talked to him about 7 or 8 years ago. And she remarried a William DeMule. She lived in Rockland, and she, because of her singing, she was a manager of a nightclub on Route 139 in Rockland. I'm pretty sure that's the one. Now Nina is Nina, and her marriage was up here to Julian Scott Bradford, who was Mildred's boyfriend. Julian Scott Bradford, Mildred's boyfriend, and Nina ended up marrying him, and it was his second marriage, and Nina's first. That happened, I think, in about 1944. Vanessa passed on. She gave me pictures and what have you, but there, it was a good relationship for a while. And there is a son, Julian Scott Bradford, who's still alive. I think he lives in New Hampshire. some of these people, and they were all in Florida. A lot of them were in Florida, Indian Harbor Beach, which is fairly close to Cocoa Beach where we go. Satellite Beach also is down there. And the Luther family, who was married to Lottie Hunt, is troubled, I guess is the best way to describe it. Leona died of a stroke, and it was Lottie Hunt that had the mitochondrial disease. It's carried by the female part of the relationship. And this one was an Alzheimer patient. Mildred Pierce Jr., this Rusty, he had a son who is the one I talked to in that family. They 9 kids. They had a picture in the Globe of the 9 kids having been abandoned, and they sent them to an orphanage in close to Springfield, but not actually in Springfield. And this Teresa, I have a picture of her, Teresa and her daughter. That's why I still have a phone number for her. This one had a son, Scott. No children. This let's see. Oh, this one here lived on an Indian reservation. Native American, lives on a reservation. He had a son, Lloyd, and a daughter, Maria. This Lawrence was found dead in the trunk of a car in the western United States. And this one is deceased, but he had a daughter, Cindy. Lottie remarried after Luther died. I don't have a date there. She married this Gerald Paradis, and I don't know if that mitochondrial disease continued with that other family. So, what's next here? There's Nina. Nina did not seem to be well liked either. She was described to me by a contemporary as a nasty little, rhymes with witch, begins with a B. Nina is the daughter who married her mother's boyfriend and gave Genzen pain an ending to his story. In the words of another contemporary of Nina, her relationship with her mother's boyfriend was all over town. And those are people that worked at the milepost. And this is her house at the bottom. This is where, when she first got married to the mother's boyfriend, that's the Bradford. That's at the end of Bay Ridge on Bay Road. We used to have it has a star on it then. I don't think that's still there. And that's Nina. Right here, this is Teresa Couture and her daughter, Brianna. And they came to the milepost when I did this lecture in 2006 or 7 sometime. Now, yeah, this is the 2 daughters are, I guess, nasty is the word. She, Vida, told her mother and her boyfriend's family that she was pregnant, and she asked for $10,000 to leave. I'm going to play this for you, and it's Hollywood's version of how it went. It's not quite the same as in the book, but it is in the book. So let's, now there's a little buzz with this audio.
Sorry this had to happen. Sorry for the boy. He seemed very nice.
Oh, Ted's all right. Did you see the look on his face when we told him he was going to be a father?
I wish you wouldn't joke about it.
Mother, you're a scream, really you are.
The next thing I know, you'll be knitting little
ridiculous about that?
If I were you, I'd save myself the trouble.
I'm not going to have a baby.
At this stage, it's a matter of opinion. And in my opinion, I'm going to have a baby. I can always be mistaken.
How could you do such a thing? How could you?
I got the money, didn't I?
Oh, I see.
I'll have to give Wally part of it to keep him quiet. There's enough left for me.
Money. That's what you live for, isn't it? You'd do anything for money, wouldn't you? Even blackmail.
Oh, grow up.
I've never denied you anything. Anything money could buy, I mean. That wasn't enough, was it? All right, Peter, from now on, things are going to be different.
I'll say they're going to be different. Why do you think I went to all this trouble? Why do you think I want money so bad?
All right, why?
Are you sure you want to know?
Yes.
Then I'll tell you. With this money, I can get away from you.
Peter.
From you and your chickens and your pies and your kitchens and everything that smells of grease. I can get away from this shack with its cheap furniture and this town and its dollar days and its women that wear uniforms and its men that wear overalls.
Peter, I think I'm really seeing you for the first time in my life, and you're cheap and horrible.
You think just because you made a little money you can get a new hairdo and some expensive clothes and turn yourself into a lady. But you can't. Because you'll never be anything but a common frump whose father lived over a grocery store and whose mother took in washing. With this money, I can get away from every rotten, stinking thing that makes me think of this place or you. Vita! Not on your life! I said give it to me!
Get out, Peter. Get your things out of this house right now before I throw them into the street and you with them. Get out before I kill you.
This other video clip is from the HBO series, and we like it. Good boy's wife is here. He and I took Italian classes for 4 years or so, and this is her, Mildred, talking to the maestro, who's an Italian maestro, and he's the daughter wants to have him teach her, and it's just a couple of Italian words, but basically a little bit of a description of Vita. Let me see if I can get that.
Well,
All right, here we go.
Well, Mr. Treviso, I'm very sorry too, but I'm afraid Vita is my daughter after all, and I feel that
Why do
I
you
have
want
every
this girl
right.
back? Tell me that.
You're mistaking my motives.
No mistake. No mistake. I tell Vita. You're pretty lucky, kid. Somebody else paid a bill now, and she got no idea who to call up. Say thanks. Sure is swell. I'd like to see me again, huh? Vincenzo, vieni a prendermi con la
That
macchina.
wasn't my intention, but certainly if Vita did.
Listen, you. You seem like a sensible lady, no? You go to a zoo, huh? See a little snake? It's from India. It's all red, yellow, black. Very pretty little snake. You take home? Huh? Make a little pet like puppy dog? No. You got more sense. I tell you, it is the same with these Vita. You buy ticket, you look at the little snake, but you don't take home. No.
What are you insinuating? That my daughter is a snake?
No, it's coloratura soprano. It's much worse.
Oh, what is a coloratura?
Madame, is special fancy breed, like a blue Persian cat. Come once in a lifetime. Sing only the trill, staccato, cadenza, the tough stuff, costs like hell. If his real coloratura brings more dough to Grand Opera House than big wop tenor. And this girl is coloratura. Even her bones is coloratura. You see the high nose, the deep anrim sinus. You see Snack Coham program? Not good singer, is great singer.
She's a wonderful girl.
No. Is wonderful singer. The girl is something else.
Well, that's your surmise, Mr. Treviso.
Is no surprise. For the last 2 weeks, ever since Nakohem program, this little empress had told me that her poor dumb mother will try to get her back, and first thing she do is come in here offer pay for singing lessons.
She...
Yes, I tell you, is snake, is bitch, is coloratura. And me, I don't enjoy a snake bite.
I love that.
You want to try and keep her on the mama's wing her whole life? That is your business. Me, I have nothing to do with this intrigue. Now, if you'll excuse me. Avanti. Be nice.
Avanti. Let's see here.
Well, Mr.
Oh, there we go. Now, the novels that he wrote were based on real people. Did I go backwards here? This is Tiger Woman Ruth Brown Snyder. Someone referred to her as Ruthless. She and her boyfriend murdered her husband. His name was Judd Gray. Now, if you're sensitive at all, you might close your eyes for the next picture. They were not smart criminals. They met justice. And this is an unauthorized photo of her execution. And I will go back to that. But what happened, to get that picture, you couldn't have a camera at the execution, and a photographer from the New York, I think that's the New York Daily News, he had a camera on his ankle and shot a cord up his leg to his pocket, and when they threw the switch, he clicked the camera, and it was on the front page of the newspaper the next day. And in theory, authorities, you're not supposed to have a camera in that place, and I think they checked to make sure you didn't, but he had a camera on his ankle. So they both were executed. And the point of this is that Postman Always Rings Twice and Double Indemnity were based on her and her boyfriend. And that's why I think Kane was not above writing about real people. He had trouble with the ending. He says, Hoop says in his biography that he kept stopping at a certain place and he couldn't end the book. And then Nina married the mother's boyfriend, and he had an ending, and the book became very successful. And 2 movies in which both people who played Mildred Pierce won the highest award in their field. An Academy Award for Joan Crawford and an Emmy for Kate Winslet. Something that's sort of new now. Well, that's where he had trouble with the ending. Now, there is a letter at the University of Southern California which has the Warner Brothers archives in it. That is from a Mildred Pierce. The name is not uncommon. That claims that her family was the model for Mildred Pierce, the book. I've been trying for almost about a year to get my hands on the letter. The archivist either just left or was fired. I kept calling him, and I got no results. And I had a couple of researchers ready to go research it. And they told me now that the archives is closed until at the very best March. They are searching for a new archivist, and they got to train him, and then maybe I might be able to get somebody to find that letter. Kevin Lord, who was one of those 5 sons that Myrtle had. He said that, he's Myrtle's grandson, and his mother was Judith Ellis. He told me that he had heard this story at the dinner table. I think that's another supporting piece of evidence. And as I said at the bottom there, case almost closed. And that's the end. I'll take any questions if anybody has questions. Well,